I welcome our moderator, Ms. Anu Ranganath, Program Lead, E-Mobility at WRA India. Joining her on the panel, I invite Ms. Amrita M.D, Assistant General Manager, Strategic Account Sales and Business Development in Terax Transmission Private Limited. Following to that, I invite Mr. Sreenivas, Founder, Adapt Charge with expertise in Big Data and Analytics. I invite Mr. Jai Govind Tirupati, CEO of Soaring Group, part of Suzlon, a seasoned risk management and insurance professional with over 30 years of experience. Thank you. I'll hand over the session to the moderator to take it up.
Check. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right. My name is Anu Ranganath. I'd like to welcome you all to the session EV Growth versus Ground Reality. I'd like to congratulate the organizers on setting up such a wonderful, successful event. Today with me, joining esteemed panelists from the industry, and we're going to explore the challenges, opportunities towards the electric mobility development in India. Before we start our discussion, I'd like to quote some statistics. As we all know, India has set a 30% EV penetration target by 2030. Today we stand at 7 to 10% right now across the vehicle categories, with 2 and 3 wheelers leading this. And there is a requirement of 1.3 million public chargers by 2030. This tells us two stories. One is the success that India is progressing towards, and the second is also the opportunity and the challenges that lie ahead. With this, I'd like to begin with a broad question for all our panelists. India's EV market has grown rapidly. Are we truly ready for mass EV adoption, or has vehicle growth outpaced ecosystem readiness? Over to you guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amrita, and I am from Tyrix Chargers. So we are the manufacturers, we are the OEMs of AC and DC chargers. We deploy the chargers across, the public chargers across India, as well as we work with a lot of OEMs. Coming to the question, I would like to begin with a question. Suppose there is a smartphone and you are asked to go 20 kilometers to charge it, and only to know the charger is there, is not working. Would you ever buy that? No, right? So that's what we are asking the Indian consumers, especially the car buyers, to do today. See, the growth is real. There is no doubt about it. But the infrastructure is, it still has to catch the pace with which the EVs are growing. Now, why this is happening? Let me just put some, not really the statistics, the scenario. So in India, we are caught in something called as asymmetry trap, where the growth looks real again, but the charging infra hasn't caught up. The almost 80% of the vehicles plying on the roads today are still 2-wheelers and 3-wheelers. So they can charge at home with a slow charging. So the EV charging infra companies have built the chargers, but they are not getting utilized because they have assumed the car growth or the, say, the heavy commercial vehicle growth will follow. But that did not happen. Also, these chargers were put way too early and at the wrong locations. So still, they are still underutilized. So this is the gap which we are facing now. The growth, I would say, is still real, but we need to fix the nuts and bolts of the EV ecosystem, which is the charging part and the reliable charging part. Thank you.
So, hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jai Govind Tirupati. I am the CEO and Director of Origin Insurance Broker Private Limited. I come from Pune. So, this is very pertinent question today, that whether, as a country, as a community of user, and, all the infrastructure provided, are we ready? So, I would say we are not ready. We are at some inflection point where, the beginning is there, but a lot of robust ecosystem need to be built and evolved to support the consumer need with respect to what? With respect to the efficient charging system. That is most important. Even any consumer who bought the vehicle need the reliable, accessible charging system. That is one part of it. And this will only come when the entire ecosystem really conspires together, sit together to make it successful, starting from government policies, manufacturer, the service provider, insurance companies also. And since I represent the insurance company, now this EV vehicle comes with a different kind of risk. I'm talking about the vehicle because they are battery driven, they're not petrol or diesel driven. So they have very serious risk with respect to the battery. And also beyond the battery, if you go the charging system. So insurance company, though they have started issuing the policy, but they also need to build the specific product, customized product, comprehensive product to take care of all the new risks, all the emerging risks with respect to the battery, the thermal runaway reaction, even some cyber related attack also, because the modern EV vehicle on the private car would also be connected through digital. So this will only take off when all the parties associated in the ecosystem put their best effort to really make it viable and give the great comfort to the customer. Then only this will take off to a scalable level, to a sustainable level. Otherwise, we are at that inflection point where it can also be a risk for all of us. So we need to be very careful, starting from policymaker to the government to the manufacturer and all the service provider. That's my take.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Sreenivas Bandi. I'm the CEO and the founder of Adapt Charge. We operate across UK and India, and we focus on both private and public EV charging. Back to the question, are we kind of ready in outpacing growth and etc.? I would say this can be better explained by what we call a catch-22 situation or a chicken and egg. Do we provision the infrastructure, or do we let the consumers buy the EVs first? Because as the panelist was saying, there were many chargers being underutilized. But at the same time, without having the chargers, we can't actually encourage the drivers to buy the EVs. There's caught in something what we call the dichotomy. But again, if you look at the existing charging infrastructure, I'll focus myself primarily on the four-wheelers, because on the two-wheelers and the three-wheelers, there's a lot of enhancements, there's a lot of advancements. You can charge it at home. So the charging of two-wheelers is never a problem. And with respect to the three-wheelers, there's a battery replacements. No, the batteries are getting replaced, there's all modular. So the two-wheelers and three-wheelers market, I would say it has passed its tipping point where it's pretty much stable, or it take its own pace. But the main challenge now comes in order to reach the 30 by 30 objective. If we ever have the 30% of EV penetration across all the vehicular traffic, four-wheelers, fleets are the next answers. But the charging requirements of the four-wheelers and the fleets is entirely different planet compared to your two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And we can't say, I'm just reading some statistics in India last week, and it said we have a month-on-month growth of 71% in public charging. But that's a pure sales figure. Yes, the number of deployments of 71%, but what about the usability and the availability? And what about the placement of the chargers? And I just want to raise one more question. Yes, there are public chargers. Absolutely agree on that. And the closest public charger to me is probably about 1 kilometer away. And does it mean that when I buy an EV, I'm buying an EV because there's a charge of 1 kilometer away? You could ask me, oh, it's the same analogy, right, that we're using for petrol and the diesel stations as well. But the main difference is with the petrol and the diesel station, it's a 5-minute stopover for you. You drive in, You fill in the petrol or somebody fills in the petrol or diesel, you pay and then you drive out. So the transaction period kind of, you know, for you in a fuel station is hardly not more than 5 minutes. But that doesn't happen at an EV charging station. So the minimum is what we're looking at 30-45 minutes. So increasing the public charging stations is not going to be the answer for an accelerated EV adoption. We need to kind of, you know, marry the EV adoption with comfort and convenience. And that's where kind of, you know, we are kind of, you know, spearheading. We are encouraging a home charging. So unless and until the EV drivers have the kind of, you know, confidence that I can comfortably charge at the convenience of my home, I strongly believe the EV adoption always kind of, you know, falls back.
Thank you to all the panelists. I think it's a shared emotion that the journey doesn't end with selling vehicles, it definitely goes beyond. And now that goes to the very critical next point. I'd like to invite Mr. Sreenivas to share your views. So vehicle sales are accelerating. I think that's something we echoed throughout. What about the after-sales ecosystem? Can you share your thoughts? Where are we lacking? Battery diagnostics, I think that's where you come in as well. So over to you.
So it's a technology evolution. So something that didn't exist kind of, you know, let's say, sorry to bring this one, but let's say pre-COVID, it's a good distinguisher. These electric vehicles didn't exist kind of, and I think the only thing I could remember in India is Reva, which is kind of, you know, going back to 2012 and 2014. I think it's too early to be in the market. But beyond than that, I can't think of any electrical vehicle or any electrical sort of a thing in the mobility segment being talked about or kind of, you know, in India pre-COVID. So what happened was that it's a sudden influx of electric vehicles into the market. And when you look at the electrical vehicle servicing, it's a complete, what we're dealing with there is just not a vehicle. It does have a motor, but the number of moving parts are different. And the makeup of the EV is predominantly, I would say, is an electrical unit. So we're not looking at someone who can actually change or kind of, you know, crank my shaft, or somebody who can change my kind of an engine belt, or somebody who can kind of, you know, look at my engine oil. I'm looking at someone who is more knowledgeable in dealing with batteries. And as Ms. Jaivi was saying, kind of, no, there's a thermal runaway of the batteries, and there is kind of, you know, the ecosystem, the health of the battery, and that is something kind of, you know, that begs a completely different skill set. And to the point, kind of, you know, as the moderator was asking, yes, we are far behind in terms of, you know, the actual skill set that is required to embrace the sales from an after service. Well, is it a problem? I don't think it's a problem. It's just kind of, you know, we are right now in the crux of kind of, you know, catching up the pace. It's again going back to the catch-22 situation. Do I deploy my service people? Do I train them, anticipating there's going to be more EVs, or it's kind of, you know, more of a reactor? Let the people buy EVs, then I'll kind of, you know, train my kind of, you know, service personnel. So it's a tough question to ask, but at the moment where I see the market, again, this problem is not alone in India. I've seen kind of, you know, the EV evolution kind of, you know, with my close eyes, with a close vicinity in the UK, in the Europe. They went through a similar transition, and exactly we are also kind of, you know, in a similar transition, and we are going to catch up with it.
I think ultimately people don't judge an EV when they buy it. I think it's every day when they own it. This takes me to the next topic, which is consumer confidence. I'd like to invite the two of you to answer this question. Despite, you know, the technology that Mr. Sreenivas spoke about, advancement, there's still a lot of barriers that consumers face. So I'd like you to share your thoughts and perspectives on the same.
So barriers, if you could name a few.
In terms of building trust, range anxiety could be one, safety could be one.
So see, there is definitely range anxiety, the battery life, the resale value. That's still a bigger question when it comes to consumers' minds while buying an EV, especially the cars. And there is no denying in that. I would be lying if I deny that. But you know, industry has very well addressed these concerns by giving higher warranties, higher battery life, good thermal management systems, good buyback. Even yesterday I just read, of course there are other OEMs as well. Yesterday I read Kia Cyrus is giving the battery life a warranty of extended warranty of till 13 years with a range of 565 kilometers per charge, and but the buyback of 80%. I think this is pretty much good, and all the OEMs are working towards this to address the basic concerns when it comes to battery life and other basic anxieties. But the anchor which is still dragging down the customer's confidence, again, I would be still pressing, is EV charging. They need the reliable EV charging, and like he said, we should not, travel down 5 kilometers to just have an EV charger. That is one. Also, when it comes to the highway drive, it becomes the availability. Now even coming to availability of EV charger, if you see, yeah, there are 10 different EV chargers available, but then when you reach there and the charger is not available, it's not functional, there is no power, there are power issues, then what are you going to do? My leisure trip will be turning into an anxious trip altogether. That is one. Secondly, I have to have 3 different apps to across 3 different, if there are 3 different charging networks. So my entire trip, like I stated, it's entirely anxious. I'm anxious throughout the journey till I reach my destination. So again, we have to fix this charging part, as well as we need a lot of state interventions for one app, ease of payments, which SIRS company is actually doing a good work in it. We need to fix things. Thank you.
Yeah. See, the customer anxiety, if you ask, is not towards, the range. Now, range is improving, the manufacturers are improving, that how much range it can provide in one charge. It goes even beyond that. And beyond that, if you see what it matters, one matter, how reliable is the battery? What is the real life of the battery and how the performance of the battery would be over the long run? This vehicle would be available for 7 years, 10 years. Whether the battery is going to be, that stable, that strong throughout the life cycle of the vehicle. Because battery is the biggest, the value in the vehicle. And any problem in the battery, the warranty not being there, the service problem being there, this is one. Another is, the customer doesn't want the vehicle, for the short period. Lot of customer would also like to see that how the entire ecosystem is supporting the consumer and supporting the customer for the entire life cycle of the, the use of the vehicle. And that also includes whether, the insurance would be available for the entire life cycle, whether the insurer will support with the specific risk associated with the EV vehicle, how the resale of the vehicle would be, 3 years down the line, I buy the vehicle, I want to resell it. Whether the resale value would be available, 3 years down the line or will not be available. What is the certainty? And even if there is a risk of, losing on the resale value, whether any insurance product can be designed by the insurance company. So there are a lot of evolution are happening on the EV technology, EV infrastructure development adoption, but I can, assure the audience here that insurance companies and we as an intermediary are proactively working with the insurance company to make sure that whatever the specific risks are, associated with the EV vehicle are fully addressed through proper insurance protection, including, the coverage for the, certainty on the residual value of the vehicle. So insurance company is ahead of, what market needs. I think if the market together, involving government, again involving manufacturer, involving infrastructure provider, society as a whole, and consumer group, we are set for a substantial growth for the future. And consumer will benefit from all the collective and collaborative effort from all the stakeholders.
Thank you, Ms. Amrita. Thank you, Mr. Jaideep. I think we will come back to financing and insurance in just a bit. We'll have the detailed question around it. So consumer confidence definitely differs from somebody who owns it in a tier 1 city versus tier 2 city. I'd like to invite Ms. Amrita and Mr. Sreenivas. What needs to change before EV becomes a practical, an attractive choice in tier 2s and tier 3s?
Can I have the question again, please?
So what needs to change in tier 2s and tier 3s until which EVs become attractive and a good solution?
I mean, tier 2 and tier 3 kind of poses an interesting proposition for the EV market. Well, in fact, I strongly believe they are well placed for EV adoption if one particular issue can be addressed. because we touched upon the convenience of charging, home charging. I mean, in the urban diaspora, we live in kind of multi-dwelling units, apartments, group housing, everything, where the comfort of having a home charger is not very much viable because of the policies or kind of the restrictions, the associations or the bylaws of the associations. However, in the tier 2 and the tier 3 cities, the significant portion of the population or the kind of the living significant portion lives in individual homes, and you have the kind of the comfort of actually fixing an EV charger there. However, the problem is the grid stability. I mean, unlike, for example, I mean, we all have UPS, right? I mean, we are all aware of the UPS. I mean, there's one reason why we put UPS against a TV or a fridge or kind of some costly electrical appliance. It's just mainly to kind of concise the voltage fluctuations happening from the grid. And that is the biggest kind of problem I see in tier 2, tier 3 cities, where until the grid flexibility, the grid stability is achieved, they cannot kind of have, they're not confident enough to adopt an EV. But is that a kind of a complete showstopper? Well, we don't believe. I mean, when there's a problem, there's a solution. We don't need to invent a solution, a problem for a solution. But this is definitely a problem that's hindering the EV adoption. And that's where we come in and say, you need to be more self-reliant for the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Because you're having an individual home, why don't you look beyond the grid? You have the ability kind of supported by the subsidies to look at solar panels. I mean, have a kind of a modular battery installed. I mean, we had the 2 sessions previously were mainly about the grid crisis and the battery management system. Now, we need to kind of distill the batteries from CNI, from large kind of power plants to a modular batteries, install them at the homes, and that provides the grid stability. And also with the solar, the subsidy being available, that would be a good recipe for me to encourage the EV adoption in the tier 2 and tier 3 cities. And I strongly believe to reach the 30 by 30 initiative, we cannot leave the tier 2, tier 3 cities behind. They must be brought along with urban kind of communities to adopt the EVs.
Right. I'll just add in a few points. See, when we say EV adoption in tier 2 and tier 3 cities, we should not just look from the lens of passenger vehicles. I feel there is a good amount of adoption when it comes to two-wheelers and three-wheelers. When it comes to two-wheelers, there is a really good adoption in tier 2, tier 3 cities, as well as three-wheelers, delivery rides, the small commercial vehicles. There is the e rickshaws. There is a good amount decent amount of adoption that is happening. So these are fairly dependent on the AC charging at the convenience of their homes. They're able to easily charge. What we need for more further adoption is not the high charging network there, but again a good network of AC charging and of course the good supply of electricity. But that also, I mean, that is also not a big problem. We did see EV adoption, good EV adoption in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. Rest highways also have been now recently charged with the DC fast chargers. So as per my opinion, there's a good adoption there.
I think both of you rightly said about infrastructure. I think affordability is another big aspect which we will come back to. We do have a question on how financing and risk insurance have kept up in pace with the EV technology.
So we'll just take a moment here as Miss Amrita ma'am has to catch a flight. So we can provide her the memento and take a picture, and then we can continue with the session.
See, I think, it's like the moment, the EV evolution has started in India, the important stakeholder, that is the banks, financial institution and insurance company, have also started, offering the, both loan and insurance product. But the point is, I think this is something which is for the future generation. If we are reducing, the consumption of the petrol and diesel, actually we are saving the planet. We are saving the climate. Now what financial institutions should do, financial institutions should really come out with a scheme, and maybe as an intermediary representing the interest of the consumer, we are also discussing with the insurer that what improvement you should be doing to make the insurance product more reliable, more customized, and also comprehensive from the user point of view. So that is one. And other is, if you come to the insurance, now whether vehicle breaks down or vehicle meets with the accident, now what is the customer will do? Whether the customer is qualified, whether the customer is aware that what to do next. So even the awareness with respect to the how the insurance claim is to be handled, what steps to be taken, and what those the dealership can do to make sure that the customer doesn't go out of pocket during the repair process. Most of the cost which is incurred to undertake the repair after an accident is covered under the insurance policy, and also the repair period at the garage level should also be reduced. So that will all depend upon how the trained manpower is available, how the infrastructure is available with the garage, with the dealership, to make sure that the customer gets a good experience. So that's the initiative and the step which the financial institution and the insurance company will have to take to make sure that the consumer are really encouraged to buy the EV for their personal, commercial and business use.
Thank you, sir. I think that's very insightful for us to be informed. Would you like to add? Or?
Anu, in my view, sorry to contradict with Mr. Jai Govind. I think from a financial and the insurance standpoint, the industry is well set. If you want to kind of go and buy an EV or for the matter any vehicle, as long as your CIBIL score allows you to lend the money or borrow the money, I mean, you have the finances available out there. But it kind of, I would like to marry this question back into the consumer confidence. I mean, is it the lack of the finances or the insurance know-how that's actually stopping a prospective EV driver from buying the EV? Or is it something else? And in my view, that's something else. And that something else is kind of is basically two things. Range anxiety. I mean, earlier, if I would say kind of, maybe 12 to 18 months ago, most of the EVs were only promising maybe a max of 200 to 50 kilometers. That's under ideal test conditions. But the moment you hit on the road, that could drop down to 150. That is the biggest kind of showstopper back then. But now, I think as Amrita was saying, kind of Kia just launched its Seltos, I believe, if I'm not wrong, EV variant with a promise of 560 kilometers. That's a good enough kind of range in my view in the current conditions. So the range anxiety is being addressed, but that still has one unanswered question, which is charging anxiety. So can I charge my car? That's the biggest, I would say, is an unanswered question right now, which is pulling the users back, or kind of is the most demotivating factor when somebody is looking up to buy an EV. If I have an individual home, I wouldn't have that question. But 80% of us kind of residing in apartments or some sort of a multi-dwelling units, that question always lingers in the back of your mind. Okay, how do I charge my car? And when you have those questions, your confidence drops, though your finance is available. And that's where kind of is the main hindrance, I would believe.
I think that's good to have two different views on the same dais. So thank you for your candid opinions. We've discussed technology, charging infrastructure, barriers, tier 2 versus tier 1. And I'd like discuss a little bit about how do we actually measure success. We only go on about vehicle sales, vehicle EV penetration. So how do we redefine success looks like for the EV ecosystem? I'd like both your views. If you want me to repeat the question, should success be measured only by vehicle sales? Or should we equally focus on customer satisfaction, charging reliability, and any other parameters that you think see here?
Not just the EVs, but in any business line, any segment, kind of the definition of success is quite subjective and hard to define. But back to what Anu was saying, kind of, I would say the metrics for this success is a sum total of everything. I mean, the sales, obviously, that drive to tell us kind of how many EVs, whether it's 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, 4-wheelers, or fleets are buying, because that's the kind of significant market indicator. And that allows us kind of charging operators to see what is the next kind of the user requirement could be. So the sales is quite critical to understand where the market is heading. But at the same time, after sales, I'm not going to the service aspect itself, but I bought an EV, but kind of the convenience of charging, I would say, I mean, if I were to kind of give certain kind of marking criteria for each and everything, I would say the charging convenience, in my perspective, will take the lead in measuring the success. How effectively are the EV drivers, or how conveniently the EV drivers are able to charge their cars without being left over in the morning? Hey, I want to go to the office. I want to kind of go out on a leisure trip, as Amrita was saying, but I don't want to have a panic situation saying that I have a very depleted battery, or I don't know whether my battery will take me to my destination. So my success would be where we see kind of more smiley faces from the EV drivers, that when they come out confidently and then say, we don't have the charging anxiety. And I would really want to hear those kind of golden words from the EV drivers, that we don't have the charge anxiety anymore.
So I think, the question, Anu, which you're asking, is it only, the vehicle sale is the criteria, or the reflection of that industry is going in the right direction, or there are, certain important parameters beyond that. And it is certainly, lot of other parameters beyond, how the sales is happening. Sales is what, is the temptation, due to several reasons, how the consumer decides to buy the EV vehicle. Lot of consumer would not do the necessary due diligence, as compared to somebody else would have done. But a neighbor, a friend, a relative buys the EV, there is a temptation to buy the EV without really doing all this, this proper study, proper diligence. And what Sreenivas said, I think it's coming out very clearly that charging infrastructure, which has to cope up, with the need of the customer and within the reach of the customer. So both need within the reach, the time which is required, to charge the vehicle, slow charging, fast charging. Even if the fast charging, what could be the mechanical, electrical consequences, into the electrical system, all things should be taken. That is one part of it. The second part, which none of the customer are thinking, that if the vehicle meets with the accident, what is the ecosystem, which he is going to use? Whether, again, charging is fine, but even the proper garage, proper technology, proper repair, the equipment are available at the garage level, are not available. Whether the manufacturer, who want to sell into the large number, are taking care of all those initiatives, setting up the infrastructure for the service and also for the accidental repair. That is also equally important to establish now. We are running the vehicle, but if the vehicle breaks down or the vehicle meets with the accident, all those things will matter. And what else will also matter, which I told earlier, is the residual value. People buy it also to get out of this maybe 50% cost, 60% cost. Now whether the second hand market for these EV vehicle would be available or would not be available, we'll see 3 years down the line, 2 years down the line, that how the momentum is picking up. And if the residual value or the resale value is not available, that would be the great impediment to really scale and have the sustainable sale and the great number. Yeah.
Thank you both. I think success for me is very simple. My neighbor was one of an early adopter. He bought an EV scooter several years ago. And every year during Diwali, he comes home and borrows our scooter because he has to go to Hosur, buy firecrackers and comes back. For me, success is this Diwali, I hope he doesn't have to borrow my scooter. So, now moving to, I think, government incentives. They played a significant role in encouraging local manufacturing, localizing the child parts, the BOM components. There's a bit of a controversial question. I'd like both your perspectives. If government subsidies disappeared tomorrow, would EV market continue to grow? Why or why not?
Can I take that, Anu? Yeah. So government subsidies kind of play an important role in the early adoption. And when we look at this EV segment, I think it's important to be distinguished between what I would say commercial vehicles and non-commercial vehicles, which is predominantly two-wheelers and four-wheelers. Kind of might classify them as a non-commercial. I think the incentives and the subsidies in the non-commercial segment have, I would say, a slightly lesser role, but they do kind of play a significant role in terms of your fleet conversions, your kind of heavy vehicular kind of conversions. That actually motivates many MSMEs and kind of industries to start embracing EVs in converting these fleets, which could make a significant change in the kind of so-called economical and kind of environmental differences that we want to make. So yes, I would say the incentives and subsidies are intertwined or very much kind of glued into the whole adoption curve.
Would you like to add your perspective?
I think, subsidy is what? Subsidy is a motivation to buy because, you get some discount. But I think, see, when you are into the business and when you are into the scalable business, subsidy, should not be a factor in the long run. I think the system, the manufacturer and the entire ecosystem should be able to withstand on its own without, soliciting or needing the subsidy in the long run. Initially, to really give the momentum, it could be fine, but I think the system has to really evolve to that level where the government support, should not be the motivating factor or the catalyst to put it to the scalable, situation. So that's my opinion.
Thank you. So from both, you come from two different sectors, two different fields within the EV ecosystem. So what is one misconception you'd like to break for the consumers from your perspective?
So I keep going back to the same point because that to me is the biggest kind of solution that needs to be addressed. So the conception is going back to kind of what Amrita was also kind of saying earlier. The mere number of charges, placement of the charges kind of whatever doesn't determine an EV adoption. Well, kind of if I take kind of the statistics in Bangalore, I might say kind of in Bangalore, and if I just pull up the numbers, we might say, oh, we have got maybe 5,000 EV charges. But what does that mean? It doesn't mean kind of you can kind of go and charge wherever you want. But the thing is, that's where kind of the misconception is basically between the numbers. The charges do not translate into a charging experience. Your charges is 500 charges kind of maybe your high-speed charges, your DC charges. But again, the conception is I don't need to kind of charge. Do I need to charge on the DC charger every day, or can I kind of not charge it? So there's a lot of dichotomy that's happening between the consumer and the availability of the chargers. So I'd like to kind of address this misconception by saying that the more the availability of the chargers within your vicinity is the most important thing which drives the industry success. So we should stop kind of chasing the number of charge points, but rather we should be chasing the convenience of charging.
So I think, misconception, I don't know how many misconception consumer would have because, that all depends upon, how the consumers are thinking and what is the problem they have themselves faced or they have heard it, from their peers, from their friends, from their relative with respect to that, how is the actual experience of the consumer. Now, this is more related to the actual experience of the consumer for whatever period, they have been associated with the EV vehicle. This could be like, one, of course, that goes without saying that if there is no fuel for the EV vehicle is the fully charged battery. Now, if that ecosystem itself is poor, I think, you are not heading anywhere. So that goes without saying that you need to have the good charging infrastructure at your doorstep. But beyond that, there are also a lot of, the concept which the customer may be thinking that are equally in place, as good as or as bad as, what is available for the petrol and diesel vehicle, but it may not be available for the EV vehicle. And those are the area, to be also kept in mind by the customer that whether every ecosystem is comparable. A lot of things limitation we know that we cannot go on long run, 400 kilometer, 500 kilometer. So it's clear that, this is only for the short distance or intercity travel, but not for the long distances. But another misconception, in terms of, ये तो बिक जाएगा, I'll get the residual price after 3 years. for throughout the life cycle of the vehicle, the insurance would be available. We can't say it with the absolute certainty, because if the vehicle gives the very adverse loss ratio to the insurance company, some of the insurance company may also think that we will withdraw from participating in the insurance program for this kind of segment. So lot of things we need, few things we need to do, and lot of things we will see as we progress and adopt it more. But many things will surface in the future, and I think the ability and the responsibility of the entire ecosystem is to really avoid as many as problems which the customer may have in the future. So that would be nice.
Thank you both. As we conclude today's discussion, I'd like both of you to leave your thoughts and opinions on one question. If you have the opportunity to leave an impact on either a policy change, an investment change, to accelerate EV adoption in India, what would it be? I think that would be the concluding thought from both of you, please. I'm happy to start off if you want to gather your thoughts. I think since OEMs are always in the position of power, I think we need to force and twist their hands a little bit to ensure they are a part of the ecosystem and ensure they localize their child parts. That would be my take. Put in more pressure on the OEMs to localize it, to encourage the MSMEs, to encourage local players to design, manufacture the automotive components. That would be my perspective.
So Anu, I mean, yes, we can kind of twist the arms of the OEMs to kind of make it much more Indianized one, but EVs as such, I think kind of this is driven by the consumers. So I can influx the market with kind of different brand, different models, different kind of capacities and everything. But unless the consumer is motivated to buy an EV, you have a stock sitting in your warehouse, sitting in your kind of your inventory is piling up, but it won't convert into a sale. So one thing I'd like to kind of if given an opportunity is, I think how many of you know this one or not kind of but last year in October, BSI, the business, the Indian Standards Business, kind of made a recommendation that EV charging is not kind of permissible in basement. That to me was kind of a bit harsh, because I think the technology has evolved. I mean, with all due respect to the panel members of the BSI, there's no doubt on their caliber and everything, but the technology has evolved. If you were to kind of put such a kind of restrictions, you're actually imposing a restriction on the adoption itself. So impose your restrictions on the safety standards of the batteries. So last night, kind of I was reading an article which says kind of the Tata Nexon has graciously got NCAP 5 rating. An NCAP 5 rating is about the structural integrity of the vehicle. But with the EVs, they need to look beyond the structural integrity and they need to look at the kind of the battery dynamics. So the policies should be driving more on the safety of the batteries rather than imposing the restrictions on where and when they can be charged. And the moment you put a restriction on where and when they can be charged, it's a killer blow. It's a knockout punch. And I have seen kind of, because we are in this business of enabling EV charging for the residential apartments, as in I go speak with, as in my team go and speaks with the residential associations and everything, they're saying, oh, we can't install in the basement, so why would we buy it? So I'd like to kind of, such policies are kind of, they have to be very thought through. And yes, we should incentivize them by reducing some taxes. Again, I wouldn't say kind of, because it's the same vehicle going onto the road, but that's the way kind of you can motivate the people to start kind of buying more EVs.
Thank you. I think very important point you brought in about the basement charges, something for all of us to make more noise about, so somebody important will hear about it.
I think for me, see one saying, which goes with everyone. If you have to do something big in the life, the person who want to do it, the whole world, conspires for that person to achieve that success. Now, if we have to achieve, the massive success as a country, and then, the entire ecosystem has to really collaborate together to make sure that whatever are the pain points today, which are already known and which are also not known. So some of them, efficient, accessible charging facility. That is one. reliable battery. The battery is the biggest risk today. And the battery is such a bad risk today that, if it malfunctions, what is the human life risk, which is there? We have seen one, on the industrial setup, there is an explosion in the battery. Now, if the battery explodes, now whether the human safety is intact or not intact, now whether that particular point, the factor has also been factored in the design of the vehicle, and also when the vehicle is being charged. What are the possible, the risk, the possible explosion, and all those safety measures, whether with respect to the vehicle or with respect to the charging system, have been duly engineered and very well put in place. Because what may happen, physical damage, the loss to the vehicle is still fine. But any human casualty, 1, 2 or beyond that, can also put a great showstopper, for this. So we have to be very safety conscious at every step, whether it is stationary, being charged or being driven, so that people who have bought it, who have invested their money, are at least safe and use it comfortably and confidently. So that is a major point which I would like to really highlight here.
Thank you. We'd like to open up the floor for any questions from the audience, please. We can take 1 or 2 questions is what I've been told. If not, I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists and also thanks to the organizers, Bimal and team, for congratulating them for putting together such a successful event. Hopefully, and thank you to the audience, hopefully this conversation has inspired you towards a more greener India. Thank you.
Thank you, Anu ma'am, and the panelists for the honest look at where the EV ecosystem stands, the gap still to close, how close we really are to turning this moment into a everyday reality. So may I now request Shri Ramesh Shivana sir to hand over the mementos to the panelists. And I request AC Ishwar sir as well to be part of the memento.